Luke 18 says, "To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, another was a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, 'God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers and evildoers and adulterers, or even this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give a tenth of all I get.' But the tax collector stood at a distance, would not even lift his head to heaven. He beat his chest and he said, 'Lord, have mercy on me. I'm a sinner.' 'I tell you,' Jesus said, 'that this man, rather than the other one, went home justified before God. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled. Those who humble themselves will be exalted.'" I heard a story several years ago, actually back in seminary, and I think I probably shared this story with you before, so pretend it's new. There's a story about George H.W. Bush, that's Poppy Bush, the first Bush. He was visiting one day at a veteran's home, and he was talking to an elderly man in a wheelchair. And of course, he's the President of the United States, and he said, "Do you know who I am?" The man said, "No, I don't, but if you ask that nice nurse, she'll be glad to tell you." Today's story is really about humility, and spiritual arrogance. Looking down our noses at people who don't quite meet our standards. The story today is about two people who were praying. One was a righteous man who kept the law. The other, a tax collector whom everyone hated, because we've spoken recently about this. Tax collectors were those people who actually were Jews who worked on behalf of the Roman Empire, collecting taxes for the Romans from their friends, family, and neighbors. And the one thing about tax collectors you have to remember again is, I, as a tax collector, did not get paid by the Romans. I got paid by skimming off the top of the taxes. So if the Romans told me you owed 70 shekels, I would charge you 75 and only turn it at 70. So not only did I work for the oppressor, I made my money by cheating my neighbors, friends, and family. Tax collectors, then and sometimes now, are not particularly the most popular people in society. What we see in the story today is that the Pharisee praying before God and saying, "God, I am so thankful that I'm who I am. You are so lucky to have me praying to you now. Do you realize, God, how lucky you are that I am praying to you? I'm glad I'm not like the sinners, the poor, the destitute, or even this tax collector. I'm glad, and you should be too, God." The tax collector, on the other hand, couldn't even look to heaven, couldn't address God face to face, so to speak, but simply beat his chest as a sign of remorse and said, "God, take me as I am and forgive me. I'm a sinner. Have mercy." Jesus said the one that went home that day justified, made right before God, was the one who was truly contrite, not the one whose sole purpose was to impress God with who he was. I grew up in a church, and you may have known churches that kind of were like that. I grew up in a church I adored in many ways, but I'll be very honest with you. There were some folk in my church who were a little bit like that, and they were members of my own family. I heard stories after church, discussions about, "Can you believe what she wore today? Can you believe she showed up after what?" That kind of conversation. The "I'm better than everybody else because I'm holier," or "I look better," or "I give more." I'm thankful that the churches I've served have never been those kind of churches, or I would not have stayed long in those churches. I don't do snotty. There's a story that I read this week about Gregory Peck, the actor. Gregory Peck was in line one day with a friend of his to get into a very fancy, swanky nightclub. And the line was very long, And it took forever to get in. And finally, his friend looked at him and he said, "Why don't you just tell them who you are?" Gregory Peck looked at his friend and said, "If you have to tell them who you are, then you aren't." You see, spiritual superiority can make us think and act as if we're better than other people. And we've known those Christians, and maybe we've worshipped at those churches. In the 1980s and 90s, there was an SNL skit called The Church Lady, where Dana Carvey, dressed like every lady from Trinity United Methodist Church, 1972, in my hometown. The chunky shoes, the rolled down stockings, the polyester dress, and the perfect little hat and glasses. And the phrase that was always used by the church lady is, "Well, isn't that special?" Oh, isn't that special? I had a poster of the church lady in my church office, and I figured if you got offended by that, you kind of needed it. If the church lady offended you, you probably were one. Spiritual arrogance, I think, stems from our own insecurities, doesn't it? If you have to tell them who you are, then you aren't. We need to let everybody know who we are and how important we are and how well put together we are, because we need to impress the world, because God has blessed me. But it's not healthy spirituality because it's not mature spirituality. When I was younger, I thought I needed to impress people. I thought I needed to be the best little pastor in the whole world. The older I've gotten, the more I realize that all I need to do is be a loving pastor and the rest falls into place. Maybe you've had the same experiences. The older you get, the less you care about who you impress with your life. Because as long as you're good in your own heart, you're good. I've told you before, and I hope you remember it. If you don't remember it, stitch a sampler. Make a pillow, get a tattoo. I don't care how you remember it. The most important thing you'll ever hear from me as your pastor: what other people think of you is not your business. Amen? What other people think of you is not your business. Are you good with God? There you go. It's not about spiritual immaturity of having to impress the neighbors and keep up with the Joneses. Mad TV, back in the 90s, a very short-lived series that was a competitor to SNL, Saturday Night Live. And in some ways, I liked it better than Saturday Night Live back in the day. They had a continuing character on there called Stewie. Stewie was a young man, a young boy, played by a grown man. One of my favorite characters on the show. Stewie would always try to impress everyone around him, as little children are wont to do. Totally out of context, interrupting every conversation with a stupid little jump, a stupid little move, and saying, "Look what I can do. Look what I can do. Look what I can do." Over and over and over again. That's spiritual immaturity. That's the Pharisee today, isn't it? God, look what I can do. Look at how holy I am. Look at how good I am. Look at what I give. Look at how much I do for you. You are blessed to have me in your life, God. The great 19th century evangelical preacher Charles Spurgeon said, "The problem with the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector is not a lack of love for God. It's a lack of love for each other." It's not a lack of love for God, it's a lack of love for each other. Jesus told the story because he was surrounded by a religious system that systematically and intentionally looked down its nose at everybody around them who was not like them. The unclean, the unworthy, and the outsider. The thing is, these people were not just unclean, or unworthy, or outsiders. They were people who were hurting. The leper, the widow, the poor, the grieving mom, the disabled man. People whose lives were defined by brokenness and by struggle, by pain. What they needed was not to be shunned and pointed out as different from everybody else. What they needed was not one more person to smack them down and tell them how they weren't good enough. What they needed was someone to spend time with them, to give them the gift of their touch, their words, and their presence. And it's exactly what Jesus did. He touched those that society felt were untouchable. He spoke with those society ignored. He ate with those society shunned. He recognized them and he honored them with his time, with his presence, and with his words. The parable today reminds us, each of us, that we're both Pharisee and tax collector all in one package if we're really honest, aren't we? We have our wounds. We have our regrets. We have our pain and our loss, our sorrow and our grief. We all know what it's like to feel broken, unwanted, not good enough. And so we too check our spiritual maturity from time to time, and we remember that looking down our noses at others who struggle is nothing but a sign of our own spiritual immaturity and a lack of love for those around us. It's really tempting to play the look what I can do game. Look at me, God. Look at how holy I am and how good I am and how much better I am than everybody else around me. It doesn't prove how much we love God. It only proves how much we still have to learn about loving each other.